Each of you have been given 3 colors: red, yellow, blue, the 3 primary colors of the color wheel, plus white and black. You could, if you have access to it, get some extender base, which I didn't know they had for water-based inks. Here's a detail of that. But I'm not going to work with us today. We're just going to do a little color. Here's also a color wheel that talks about, adding, usually if it's a color complement. So red and blue create purple, and that's the complement of sort of yellow orange. Vice versa, you can sort of work around the wheel. The thing to note is that usually the complement will dull a color down a little bit, so sometimes things don't need to be as bright as they are. But you're going to start by working light to dark. So you're going to start with your white and add your color to it. What I'd like for you guys to do is kind of develop some color palettes. So maybe, mix some colors, just small amounts, draw them down, see what they look like. Keep track of what you're doing, and then you can sort of cut them out and kind of mix and match them. So you start with your light colors and work towards your darks. I just put a white piece of paper underneath here so I can see my colors a little better. I'm going to put out a little bit of white, and then you can see that these colors, it doesn't take much. So I'm just going to do all 3, just a little bit, so we can play around. And that's what I want you guys to do, is do a little bit of playing around so you start to feel confident with these colors by the time you start to print. And sometimes, amazingly, just the tiniest amount of black can just make a color. It's going to definitely dull it down a little bit, but it might just make it just kind of what you want. So if we take a little bit of this yellow and add it, and I know it's kind of an orangey yellow, but I think it's good to have some color. So we can add that to this white. The issue with water-based ink is that it dries quite quickly, so you need to kind of work sort of fast with these colors. So here's a drawdown, and granted, this is not terribly different than the color of the paper, but you find that it might dry actually a little bit darker, and but at least it's a good place to start. You can always make colors darker. It's much harder to make colors lighter. So let's say I wanted to add a little bit of blue to this. So it's going to give it a greener tinge now. And again, it's really important that the color all gets mixed. Draw that down. And that becomes a kind of really nice buff. If we add a little bit of red to this color, this kind of nice Melba-y pink. Again, keep track of what you're doing. So that might be a nice, almost like a nice flesh tone. And what happens then to that color if we add just a tiny little bit of black to it? Oops, I maybe added too much black. But it becomes actually this kind of interesting pinkish gray that maybe isn't so perfect for a first color, but might be really nice for a second color. and almost looks kind of lavendery gray. So even with these, you know, really basic colors, you can start to come up with rather sophisticated looking colors. And a lot of it's going to be like keeping track of what you did, which I know sometimes is easier said than done. So that becomes kind of an interesting blue-gray. What if we added more yellow? I mean, I'm just continuing, and sometimes what you may find that you sort of build colors on top of each other as well.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that you know, like you sort of take the previous color that you printed and add something else to it to print on top. Another way you might think about the two different palettes that you're going to be doing for this project is to maybe even work with analogous colors. So those would be colors that are close to each other on the color wheel. So we could do a really pale blue, and then a sort of reddish blue, and then, you know, like a total violet. And so that would be another type of palette to kind of work from. The nice thing about this ink is that you can just spritz it with water and clean it up. The bad thing is that it dries really fast, so you're going to need to work fast. And there might be times actually when you're printing, and we'll talk about this while you're printing, that what you need to do is, you know, mix maybe enough to print 2, and then mix more. So that's why it's also really good to remember how you're mixing your colors. Let's do a nice sort of analogous palette. I mean, the other thing is that you can use what they call shades and tints. So those are any color, and actually pretty much all of these are shades and tints. So these are any colors that have like white or black or grays mixed in with them to make the colors. So the thing is that I think it's really important to not just print right out of the tube, because they have this really kind of generic look to them. And so I think it's really important that you try to make some colors that, you know, have a little more interest than straight out of the can or tube, as they say. So both of these are actually pretty dark. Like, these would probably be better for like a second color than a first. But the other thing is to kind of think about a palette that maybe is a split complement. So you have like 2 colors next to each other on the color wheel, and then a third color that's kind of opposite it. So I could maybe go darker with this, or darker with that, and then work with maybe this pink. So it becomes almost like a split complement with the colors. Especially with our darkest colors, is to try and not make mud. Although, I mean, I've kind of got sort of a dull dark gray here, but it might look really nice, you know, with these other 2 colors. And in fact, once it's drawn down, I still think this color needs to be a little paler, because when you think about, you've got the white of the paper, you'll have your first color, your second color, and your third color. Your third color becomes your key image. And the second color, sometimes if that shift is too great, it just becomes this, you know, it makes the white really pop, and that can be good for some images, but it may be too much for others. So actually I would go back and kind of dull or lighten this color with some more white in order to make this kind of work. But because this is a cold black, you kind of work through a somewhat analogous palette. The other thing that you guys can do is kind of treat these like paint chips. So once you make a series of colors, you can cut them out and then arrange them next to each other, and that can help you determine what is going to happen for your block. Remember that you're going to be actually making you're going to be using 3 colors, but you're also going to be using 2 different colorways. So I might make another dark for this one, and again I can mix and match them before I decide what I'm going to actually print. I'm going to try to make a brown that will look, warm up these 2 colors, which are kind of cool. Well, I don't know, that's kind of warm.
And how did you make brown?
Well, red and orange. Actually, with a little bit of that gray that I have there. It could be a little more red, just to make it a little warmer. So it's kind of a mahogany. I think if I added a little more yellow, it wouldn't be quite as sort of pink, but I still think that those would probably make a kind of interesting print.